Hey YouTube, this is Young Vintage Gamer here, and today I'm gonna finally review that's something I've been interested in reviewing. It's Sega's, and today I'm gonna review one of Sega's belated answers to Nintendo's wildly popular Game Boy, but released later on in the years. And today I'm gonna talk about review the Sega Game Gear. Now, this console is a portable. Now, this is Sega's belated answer to Nintendo's wildly popular Game Boy. Sega made this thing to be things that the Game Boy isn't. It's a wider handheld, as you can see. It's pretty big looking. It's bigger than my iPhones for sure, and it also has a colored backlit screen. And they did release a number of accessories that Sega hoped would set this system over the top. It didn't. Now, there'll be reasons that I'll explain as to why it didn't sell well, even though it did took a distant second place. Now, the Game Gear was originally released in 1991, 2 years after the release of the Nintendo Game Boy, and its codename was Mercury. It was Sega's answer, like I said, to Nintendo's wildly popular Game Boy. So this thing's kind of like a handheld Sega, like a portable Sega Master System. It's got 2 control buttons, button number 1, button number 2. And you may notice, unlike the Sega Master System, the start button is a separate button. I promise I'll review the Sega Master System game another video entirely. But anyway, and it's got a D-pad, which is kind of similar to, which kind of looks, the design kind of mimics what the design this circular D-pad kind of mimics the type of D-pad Microsoft used on the Xbox 360 controller, where it has a circular design, almost like an analog pad instead of a D-pad. Yeah, underneath this, as you can see, I'm lucky to get a blue one. Most of them come in the black color, but they come in different colors, such as yellow, blue, transparent, clear, and there's even a Coca-Cola red version that was released exclusively in Japan. It's got a power light indicator like the Game Boy. It says Game Gear with dash of color like that. It's pretty cool. It's got the Sega portable video game system. On the top of the console, it's got this cover, much like the Game Boy I reviewed earlier. It has this nice little dust cover for an extension port where you can plug in another Game Gear and do 2-player games with another Game Gear. It's got a headphone jack with a volume adjuster. It's got an AC adapter port, which I'll show you what power supply it uses. That's there, so you can play the Sega Game Gear while it's plugged in. Here's the size of this thing. It's also underneath, it's got those things where you can attach wrist straps on it so you don't drop it. It's got a power button. Now, unlike the Game Boy, this thing doesn't lock cartridges, though. On the back, it's got, I don't know what those hinges are used for, but that's probably going to be a subject for another video. It's got the serial number right here. It uses a DC adapter, and as an option, much like any other handheld console, this thing, unlike the Game Boy, where it uses 4 AA batteries, and the Game Boy Advance and the Game Boy Color, for that matter, uses 2 AA batteries, the Sega Game Gear, here's one of the reasons why it didn't sell well. This thing uses 6 AA batteries, 3 here and 3 here. And good lord, this thing is a battery hog. And you'll be lucky if you got a certain amount of gameplay with this thing. Yeah, and the worst part about this console is that... Yeah, and the worst part about the console is that the screen is so bright that it's hard to see in the sunlight. It's more easier to see this thing in the dark than the sunlight. And And another drawback with this console is that it lacks third-party support, and not much third-party developers were interested. Anyway, let me show you. I'm not going to show you much accessories since I don't have much. I do have that car cigarette lighter outlet adapter for this thing where you can plug it into the car while you're in the car, but that's a subject for another video. For now, I'm just going to show you what kind of DC adapter this uses. Yeah, this is pretty much the same DC adapter used on the Sega Genesis Model 2, sorry, and the Sega 32X, as well as the Sega Nomad, which is like a portable version of the Sega Genesis, which that's a subject for another video entirely. And here's the pin connector it uses. So, it's bad enough this thing's a battery hog, but why does this thing have to have a space-hogging, fat-ass, box-shaped AC adapter? But it does plug in like so, like this. The Game Boy does have a DC adapter as well. So I guess I will at least give Sega credit for... I will give Sega credit for including that. Probably they thought as if they knew this thing would be a battery hog. So they gave customers options. Here's the brightness adjuster, by the way. Now, moving on, I'll show you the games I got for it so far. I got 2 of them for Christmas when I got this thing with, and I got 2 more just to demonstrate all the other games that this console has, that this handheld system has to offer. Now, I only have 4 games, and I don't have much of it, so this is all I'm going to show you. And at least at the time of this video, I only have 4 games to show you. Obviously, Sega released Sonic the Hedgehog 1, which that's a subject for another video entirely, and Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Now, when it comes to Sonic games, Sega, believe it or not, did release like a lot of Sonic games on this console more than the Sega Genesis, believe it or not. In fact, there's like a bunch of Sega Sonic games on the Game Gear more than they released on the Genesis, which is insane. And now, as far as games are concerned, the reason the console didn't sell well is because it lacks third-party support. And Sega did eventually hope that third-party developers would eventually step up. And a few did. Now, I don't have any third-party games. I don't have much third-party games, so I got one just to show that, at least, just to give you the idea that third-party developers some third-party developers did step up, and they did actually release third-party games on the Game Gear. Like this copy of Tom and Jerry the movie, the video game on the Game Gear, which this game's a subject for another video, but I hope this game is good because I spent $10 for this thing at East End Gaming, which is a local video game store in my area. And Sega also... Now, I must admit, I'm cheating slightly. This is not the original game of Columns. This is Super Columns. I think it's a sequel to Columns, but this is a subject for another video. So, I'm just going to show you this copy just to show off that Sega released Columns in this version of Columns and Super Columns on the Game Gear, just like they did for the Master System and the Sega Genesis, just to compete with Nintendo and Tetris. Yeah, and here's this type of batteries that I got for this thing. It uses 6 AA batteries, and this thing is such a battery hog. And you'll be lucky if you get, like, a certain amount of hours of gameplay with this thing. Yeah. Oh, I also forgot to mention there's a speaker in the corner right here. Oh, bumped into the tripod. So the problems with getting a Game Gear today, that if you do get a Sega Game Gear and you notice that the game's not displaying any video and there's no sound. Now, when the Game Gear was... Now, here's a story as to why that's the case now these days. When the Sega Game Gear was released, bad capacitors were rampant in the electronics industry. So if you do receive a Game Gear that is unable to play any sound or has no video. That's pretty much the reason why. But luckily for me, I got a Game Gear. This Game Gear I have works pretty good. Works pretty good. I tried it. I played Sonic. I at least tried this game, and it works pretty good. So, and even though the Game Gear is kind of easy to collect, buying games for this thing is kind of cheap and easy to come by. So, and the best part about the Game Gear is that it's region free, which means you can play games from other countries, which means you can play games from around the world. Now, I don't have any games that are from different regions aside from the US where I got these games from, because that's all I got, so that's all I'm showing you. But the facts that I'm telling you that is region free, I hope you guys know that this console is region free. Don't believe me? Try it for yourself. But yeah, afterwards with the Sega Game, after the Sega Game Gear flopped, Sega eventually discontinued this console right when Nintendo celebrated the Game Boy by introducing another franchise, which is the Pokemon franchise, with Pokemon Red and Blue, released in 1996 and 1998. So, eventually the Sega Game Gear did receive a loyal following. Another company by the name of Majesco, where they created this game that I reviewed earlier on the Game Boy Color, the 10-pin bowling game. They actually gave the Game Gear a loyal following and was given permission by Sega to re-release the Game Gear. They did make some cosmetic changes. I don't have the Majesco version of the Sega Game Gear, but that's all I'm showing you. But they do have some cosmetic changes. For example, the start button is purple, and these colors are white. And they improved the video quality of the Game Gear screen, and they also increased its battery life significantly. And the Sega and the two accessories, the Master Gear Converter and the Sega TV Tuner, are not compatible with that version of the Game Gear, which those accessories are subject for another video entirely. So yeah, in conclusion, you can still buy, if you still want, you can still buy the Sega Game Gear if you want. It's pretty easy to collect today. And so yeah, just make sure you buy this thing, just in case you don't want to constantly waste money on batteries just to play this thing. So that way when you're near an wall outlet, you can plug this thing in and use it while it's plugged in. Or even get that car adapter, which that's a subject for another video entirely. So yeah, subscribe for more videos like this. Be sure to hit a like if you like the Sega Game Gear and you like the games it has to offer. And be sure to comment down below what your favorite Sega Game Gear games are. And be sure to hit the notification bell. And yeah, I'll see you on the next video. This is me, signing off.